super excited to have this panel here today to speak about DAOs and what does this word really mean. I'm not an expert in DAOs whatsoever, and so I'll be asking the questions and trying to get to the bottom of this. And because I mean, the question and the idea for the topic came because Talent Protocol is not a DAO, at least not yet, but we're also not a company either. So what are we? What are we? Because I mean, we share a lot of values with DAOs. So we believe in much more transparency, democracy in terms of making decisions, a lot less hierarchy, a lot less rigidity. So we share the same beliefs. So are we a DAO? Are we not a DAO? So that's kind of the starting point. And I tried to bring to you today 3 different perspectives on DAOs and what DAOs mean. So yeah, let's start. We'll also try to do this kind of fast-paced, so it's interesting and to the point. So I think to start with, could you just briefly introduce yourself? So I don't know, your name, where you're based, what you're working on, and maybe what was the first DAO that you joined?
Yeah, so I'm Miguel. I work at Worldcoin, but I'm mostly here because a few months ago, a bunch of friends and I tried to buy the US Constitution, kind of like made a DAO around that. We didn't end up winning, but it did get a lot of representation for the space and for DAOs, so that was really cool. I'm based in Spain, and that's it.
Hey all, I'm Emo. I'm based in San Francisco. I do a bunch of governance stuff at Friends with Benefits, and then I also work at Gradient Ventures, which is one of Google's venture funds.
My name is Juliette from Panama. I work at Search Women as a founder and CTO, and I'm the developer advocate for Aragon.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So ConstitutionDAO, FWB, and Search, were those kind of your first DAO experiences?
I mean, I had been in FWB before, okay, but I feel like the first one where I actually like really got involved was ConstitutionDAO.
FWB, yeah, that was my first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I discovered Aragon actually because I used to work in government, and I was like, oh, there's a new way to destroy corruption and run organizations. So certainly Aragon was my first.
Okay, so now for another quick question. How would you kind of explain what a DAO is to your parents, like in 1 or 2 sentences? I mean, there are multiple hundreds of definitions what a DAO is. How would you personally explain it?
Yeah, I usually just go for the words like digital cooperative, because at least my parents know what a cooperative is, but I would in general just like see as a company with like without all of the structures that actually throughout the years we have decided like this is what a company does. And so it allows for much more experimentation in all of those things.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a collaborative token-enabled community, and then sort of have them ask me questions and go through what each of those means.
Yeah, a lot of questions. I often tell them that it's a group of people that come together over a shared objective, mission, feeling, experience, whatever it is, and they oftentimes have a shared bank account and can do cool stuff with it.
Yeah, all interesting definitions. And of course, starting from that, there's a bunch of questions that come up with. I mean, for example, I think your definition now, MO, was, I mean, a cooperative could have almost the exact same definition, or an association. So I think a way to kind of to go deeper into this is maybe kind of break down the 3 words of DAO, so we can try to explore what decentralized means, what automated means, and also what the word organization means in this Web3 context. So yeah, starting maybe with decentralized, which were the questions that I probably think about more often. So how decentralized do you need to be a DAO? Do you need to be kind of fully decentralized? What does that mean? But yeah, what's the degree of decentralization that you need to be called a DAO, in your opinion, of course? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I would say there's the concrete answer and the soft answer. The soft answer is whatever is decentralized enough such that the community feels like they want to continue to participate, because people can vote with their time and their tokens that they buy into a DAO, and you want to make sure that they feel incentivized enough that it's decentralized enough that they can be a part of it. I think more hard answer is you need to, at the very least, have an opportunity or a way for the community to surface initiatives, objectives, proposals, and get those passed and implemented.
I would say, I guess, kind of a hot take that I got after working on ConstitutionDAO was that, like, decentralizing from the start doesn't really work because it really impedes the work that you have to do. And for context, we had a core team, and the core team was still like somewhat decentralized. We were like 35 people, completely linear. Most of us hadn't really like met each other before, but still, like, if we had like done things with voting and like the regular snapshot votes for like the thousands of people in the community, we would have definitely not achieved anything at all. So I feel like similar to how people, like the progressive decentralization is a big theme for like protocols and companies. I feel like for DAOs, there's also this thing where like if you from the very start, you just like submit everything to vote, you need to have some sort of mission, and you need to like at the start guide the DAO a little bit before actually fully decentralizing, whatever that means.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with that. And I think to that end, often decentralization is really a spectrum. And it depends a lot on the stage that you're at, the type of community that you're building, the objective and the use case that community has. And so in many ways, you're picking up sort of an initial state of centralization where a leader or a team sort of decides that longer term strategy and vision. But ultimately, throughout the ideas that the initiatives and the projects and the working groups that come out of that community are the ones that can work in a decentralized way and ideally share a lot of the output that community is providing.
Yeah, I was trying to kind of combine your answers. So kind of my understanding is that in most cases, going like a progressive decentralization is what works best, because too decentralized means it's harder to get shit done. Because I mean, there's like that saying that kind of I don't know exactly what it is, but that no good idea ever came from a committee. And you can say that a committee is a decentralized decision-making kind of way. So kind of starting with like a core team that's very aligned, that kind of make decisions quickly, and then gradually kind of bringing more people in and decentralizing that. But at least you have the foundations to kind of help settle decisions or disagreements. But actually one thing that you said was, I think, very important, because the perception of decentralization, it's also important. It doesn't mean that you need to be fully decentralized, but that perception that there's ownership and that my opinion counts, even if I just kind of give my opinion once a year, but I want to feel like it counts, and I want to feel like that I'm a partial ownership of it. But yeah, we're kind of agreeing with each other, and that's exactly what I didn't want to happen. So maybe focusing on concrete use cases on your FWB, ConstitutionDAO, on like Aragon or Surge, what were kind of the struggles or challenges that you found, either with going or having too much decentralization? What problems did that bring you, or in the opposite side, when you were probably too centralized? And yeah, what were the challenges there?
I'll take this one because it feels very top of mind for me and a lot of FWB stuff that we're doing now. But I think that one of the biggest problems, at least from a centralized standpoint, is that often teams that are a little more centralized in the spectrum of that progressive decentralization is that they have so much context that when they're being transparent with the community and they try to help them understand what's going on and what's happening, they aren't transparent enough. And the feedback loop in that cycle of what they're working on and how it's happening is not happening quick enough. And I think that part of that is the push, obviously, to build in public and things like that. But I think one of the biggest problems when things get too centralized is that they're just not transparent enough. They don't share frequently enough with the community and with enough additional context, because everyone else isn't sitting in it day to day.
Yeah, something else I'll add is based on the use case. So for example, at Aragon, we're building a product. And imagine if you have thousands of people having opinions about every single feature, about every single thing that we're doing, it'd be super hard to progress and actually have a roadmap that's effective. And so at that front, you end up having maybe a product team that is a bit more centralized, that has a roadmap that has been defined potentially by proposals by the community, by discussions that have been had sort of like at a bigger scale. But when it comes down to the implementation and deciding on this roadmap specifically with a backlog and items, that becomes a bit more centralized. And so I think it's interesting to see how the spectrum runs not only across stage of the organization, but also across the niche teams within it based on the output that's needed.
Thank you. Maybe it's time to move on to the next letter. So automation and automated, and I think a lot of the conversations about DAOs, sometimes people kind of mix the two or kind of mistake one for the other. You can be a super automated company, even using tokens and kind of automating your accounting and your legal stuff with smart contracts and tokens, and still be a very centralized organization. So in your case, kind of, how would you kind of describe what automation means for DAOs? Yeah, let's start with that. What do you think is the difference between automation and decentralization? Why is automation important?
Yeah, and I would add on to that question potentially also the distinction between automation and being autonomous, right? Which usually end up being together, but can certainly have some differences there. I think the interesting thing about the ecosystem today is that in many ways, the process to starting a DAO is highly complex. Throughout our research, we've seen that builders usually will take from 6 months to a year just to get it all started and up and running and have it set up. And so what that means is that maybe you start off only having a shared bank account, a multi-sig, that which then after, once you start building the community, you start having to start designing governance mechanisms, at which point you start needing the voting platform, but maybe you don't need it right when you start. And so what that means is that many organizations are selecting more modular approaches, where you may have a multi-sig that's connected to a snapshot off-chain voting, that then the owners of that multi-sig will go on and transfer the assets. And so really, the autonomous and the automation part of the discussion, I would say, is the one that we're certainly lacking the most in the current ecosystem. But having that said, I think that is where DAO frameworks have sort of an interesting competitive advantage for those who value that autonomous workflow. So if you're able to have on-chain voting, that immediately translates into the assets, that creates sort of like a trustless space for strangers to collaborate. There's certainly an opportunity there. But the disadvantage is that at that point, you're sort of making people come in and create them from the start, which many organizations don't have that knowledge yet.
Yeah, and I mean, to be autonomous, usually it's easier to do things like manually than it is to automate, because you need to understand like the workflow and the processes. So they are.
I think being autonomous though is tough in some ways, because people have to want to be autonomous. You have to give them a reason, or that sense of community needs to be built into the core, and people have to feel like they're part owners of the DAO. And so having it be decentralized in some ways is important, but also to build autonomy within it is you have to have individuals who are willing to raise their hand and say, I want to do this. Like, I want to make this public space better for everyone else that's in it. And I think that there are a lot of people that do that, but there's a huge chunk of people that are just kind of lurking in the background, kind of like many of us probably have been in many organizations before. And it's those people that are willing to raise their hand, though, that are actually able to really make change and build the future that we, hopefully, whatever we all want to see.
Yeah, I think we need to be used to that 90% of a DAO will be kind of passive agents, and that's okay. Just creating the systems for the ones that want to engage will have the chance to. But I think another interesting topic, and maybe for you, Miguel, is that you can argue that autonomous can be almost the opposite of creativity. So you're very automated, you have process for everything. It kind of can block creativity. And what do you think kind of in the, using the ConstitutionDAO example, which is probably less, there's probably less structure to it and was kind of a more of a thing that happened very fast. And it was, I mean, I imagine like it was a creative idea and it was very, so what's what do you see kind of that balance between being autonomous and automated versus like losing or having creativity and kind of that serendipity that happens for just people doing stuff together?
Yeah, I mean, there was no structure at all, at least at the start. So I feel like in that sense, we just like threw the whole playbook and tried to figure it out ourselves. And in that sense, I mean, in line with what you were saying, we did use a multi-sig and we didn't even like have some sort of like treasury reporting platform at the start because like due to the conditions, we literally needed to like move money really fast to like send it to Sotheby's and stuff. So in that sense, I really agree with the whole idea of like modular DAOs and how like maybe you just like, because it depends on the use case, what piece exactly are you going to need. FWB, for example, they have their treasury now, but I'm sure that when they started, they didn't need all of the infrastructure, which is like a group chat with some tokens that you used to join, and that was pretty much it. And over time, that evolves as things get more complex. We ended up losing the auction, and we didn't really evolve into that sense, so we just like returned the money. But in other cases, you could imagine how we could have established like a treasury and done all those things. And so I feel like regarding the automation part, I wouldn't say it makes creativity harder. Because automation in general, its role is to help. What I would say is that it just like makes things slower at some point, and that's by design, because you don't want anyone to attack the DAO, like what happened with, I think, Beanstalk, and then just like the whole governance to pass in like an hour, and that's it, and no one can stop it. So doing things slower and manually makes it less decentralized, but also makes it like more safe, and you eventually want to have the DAO give out more control. What we were talking about progressive decentralization, give out more control of the funds over the processes to automated things like smart contracts that can be controlled by the community without just like, I don't know, opening the DAO up to potential attacks.
Mm-hmm. I actually think it's only true though, insofar as the community itself wants to collectively work and decide. I think there are some communities that people want to join because they know out the gate exactly how it operates and how it is structured, and it is fully decentralized, autonomous, and you can build for that as well, and people can self-select if they want to be a part of it. But having something that is like fully autonomous and fully automated is a feature, not a bug in some cases.
Especially because when you look at proposals, and especially with the bigger communities, it's super hard to get engagement and have people actually be voting on what they want to be seeing. And so the autonomous part of having something run entirely without any human contact, when you have that such a low participation, can certainly be even a risk to the funds and the assets held within the treasury.
Yeah. Is there any, like to end the A part of the panel, do you have any kind of advice or suggestion in terms of one automation, one tool that's really made a difference in kind of your DAOs? You try them all, and there's still no one. Okay, we can.
I will take the opportunity to say something here, though. Like, if you are building a startup or building something for like DAO tooling, and you have never been in a DAO, maybe try to do that first. Because nowadays I see a lot, especially on Twitter, a lot of companies and a lot of founders are like, I'm going to make the one for all platform, like the platform where DAOs can just like do everything. And more often than not, you look into who those people are, and they are just like people that came from Web 2 that are thinking of like, what can I build here? And it's just like, that's the hot topic, right? And so I will take the opportunity to say that, as we have said, we have people in here that have been in DAOs for way longer than me, and that probably a lot of people here. The reason why there's not like a one for everyone platform is not because like someone hasn't had the time to build it yet. I feel like it's more because everyone needs something different. And even if you build like the little tools, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes other things for other reasons work different. For example, we use Usebox, which not a lot of DAOs were using at the time, mostly because we looked into it and it was the best combination of user experience and like being able to really quickly and really easily give a refund if we needed to. And we didn't use, for example, Mirror, which was another alternative, mostly because of the refund thing, but probably for other DAO, I would have gone with Mirror, which I still really like. So my message there, in the terms of like DAO infrastructure and automating and all of these things, is like, I don't think there can be built like a one for everyone tool for DAO, so do some research.
It's about defining the problem, right? I think a lot of people are looking at, they see something that is a problem, but is it the problem that is keeping the people who are core contributors now, is it keeping them up at night? or is it like good enough? And I think, I mean, I don't know, from my venture experiences, there's a truth to it. Actually, it has to be 10x better. Like 2x, 3x is nice to have, but it's not need to have. It's not going to make me look at it and be like, I'm using this tomorrow in many cases. And so a lot of times I think people are looking at a problem, but they're not understanding the magnitude of that problem because they're not, to your point, like if they're not actually in the DAO, they don't see what's keeping people up at night.
Yeah, and I think to your point that a lot of people don't, well, or prefer to be like passive agents. I think a lot of the times the problem in DAOs is a lot more related to motivation than it is to tools. So it's not that bringing a new tool will get people participating more and voting more. It's kind of the incentives and the motivations behind it, because some DAOs have really shitty tools, but they get a lot of engagement. So if you're motivated, you'll do it any way that you can. So I think that's good advice. Instead of just looking for tools first, work on kind of motivations and incentives, and the tool kind of will come up. So yeah, moving on to the letter O of organization. So I think two main questions that I have is one, kind of, you mentioned cooperatives. So kind of what's the difference between DAO and cooperative? You can argue that almost all enterprises are kind of groups of people with a shared bank account and working towards the same goal or mission, which is sometimes how we define DAOs. But I was like, aren't all organizations that? So yeah, what makes the DAO different from a cooperative? From the other day, someone mentioned to me like from a union. Like unions are also kind of very grassroots organization, very decentralized. So what makes these new types of organization different? And the second question, I'll make the second question later. So that's
I would say that the reason why we look at all these things like cooperatives and unions and things like this is something kind of the same is because, at least for me, DAOs have no rules. Like anyone can just like call literally anything a DAO, and like even if it's a group set with nothing else, like who is going to stop you, right? And I feel like the idea here is just like we are trying to organize people. That's like what crypto is about. It's a coordination engine after all, and we're trying to organize people. And we have this like spectrum name for like this is some sort of organization that is not necessarily a traditional company with like board of directors and stakeholders and all these things. They can have them, but they don't too. And it's like the most basic primitive for anything. So I would say unions can be DAOs. All of these things can be DAOs. You have to ignore a little bit the whole like is on Web3 part, which it's mostly contextual, but I would say like the DAO is like the starting part where there's like some sort of organization, even if it's a group of friends, and then on top of that you can just like start adding things. So it's kind of like a puzzle for like building your own organization in a way, where you just like keep adding stuff, but you start from scratch instead of starting from any of the other ways of building an organization, like a company or an LLC or whatever, and just like taking pieces off.
Yeah, I certainly see cooperatives and unions as a potential use case for DAOs moving forward. I don't see why not. I think what DAOs sort of layer on top of it is really the decentralization, sort of like open technology that blockchain brings along, and really thinking through the three main pillars for DAOs, one of them being community, the other one being the treasury, and the other one being the governance layer. And once an organization has all three, you layer blockchain on top of it, you have a DAO. And I think even when you don't, like what Miguel was saying, you just have a Telegram group, you're voting with emojis, like who says that's not a DAO? There's certain some DAO police around trying to get a definition, but realistically, like, who's gonna say it's not? I think that's part also of the process of sort of reaching a certain level of maturity within the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, so maybe I think that was a good insight. So now kind of I'm looking at DAOs in a different way. So it's not what DAOs are, it's actually what DAOs are not. So kind of DAOs is a lot of this energy and mindset of not wanting to do things the same way as they've been done before, in terms of the processes, the systems, kind of the boxes where we need to fit in. So I think what I'm feeling is that kind of when you say DAO, it means that you're exploring new ways of coordinating people, new ways of achieving goals that, of course, with technology that can enable all of that. Yeah, and I think that's probably it just became clear to me. So thank you for that. But you were mentioning maybe that's also an interesting take. Kind of unions and cooperatives can be good use cases for DAOs now or in the future, of course, when it's probably maybe easier to onboard people to this technology. What kind of organizations do you think are best suited to become DAOs and kind of in the near future? What kind of organizations today that have nothing to do with crypto Web3 could really benefit from decentralization or some degree of decentralization and autonomy?
I mean, I would say any organization that believes like they should give more input to the users, that's go for it. I recently learned that like Airbnb at the start, they ended up figuring out ways to give some sort of like shares for the Airbnb company to the first people that offer their homes to Airbnb, which I thought was really interesting because that seems like more in line with what DAOs are trying to achieve, and this idea of like giving in crypto in general of like decentralizing via giving part of the token to the users. And the reason why they did that once and never again, and also it was a mess, is because it gets like securities law and all those things were kind of like the impediment for that to really work in. So I feel like at least for now, where DAOs are kind of like the way of like maybe you don't have to worry about the law that much, or maybe you have to worry even more, but at least like it's not as established and as like protected from like other organizations. It's maybe like the time to experiment with that, and it allows doing these things. And maybe we'll get at some point more guidance over like how that enables. But the idea of just like giving ownership and giving more like power of decision to the people that use your product and the people that make your product possible is probably like a case where any company that wants that could try to transition into a DAO.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So two use cases specifically that come to mind to me of like great DAO use cases. On one end, investment DAOs. I think that's a super interesting front. Again, you're tapping into some interesting regulation depending on which country your members are from, but certainly a fun space to play out where it's proven to work relatively well. And then another one, which has not been explored enough, is political parties. I'm a big believer that if you have a group that has a shared resources that is trying to create initiatives in a flat structure, certainly a interesting use case that I'm very excited to see follow through. I will say one that I don't think has worked as well, especially if it's really in a very radical front of the decentralization spectrum. And realistically, that's product. If you're trying to build a product with thousands of people, that can be increasingly hard. And so finding a nice sort of balance there, or a nice like hybrid structure to make that happen within the DAO, I think is still a challenge that we're experimenting and playing with.
The only thing I was going to say was that Europe sounds dope if you don't have to worry about the laws.
Yeah. Two things that I was just thinking of. First, I loved kind of your example of Airbnb and how Airbnb could be a much more community-owned platform today and not a shareholder-owned one. And I think I was thinking that also there's some people that argue that kind of the biggest, or why Silicon Valley became what it is today and why it really kind of is the birthplace for kind of tech innovation has a lot to do with stock options. So it was a way in which not only the owners, the initial owners or investors get all of the value, but some of the value that's captured by those companies is also distributed to the kind of founding team, the initial team. And I think this can be like a big step forward because not only the core team and the founding team capture the value that you're creating, but all of your user base can also capture that value. So I really think that can be a big leap in terms of innovation. And also thinking about what you were saying about product not being a good use case for DAOs, which I agree, and that's why we at Town Protocol are not a DAO. Do you think, you kind of answered the question, but do you need to be a DAO to be building in Web3? Because some people kind of have this assumption to be building in Web3, to be in Web3, we all need to be DAOs and some people get that in.
I feel very strongly you do not need to be a DAO to be building Web3. And in many ways, it's hard enough to build a product and to ship that to users and to get them to love it and to pay you money for it. Adding governance and treasury and all this other stuff on top of it, it makes your life 10x harder. Like, it's already incredibly difficult to be a founder and early company. You're just trying to play on hard mode. Yeah, out the gate at least.
And I would say the thing is just like, I see the benefit of once you figure it out, all of those hard parts and how product and it works, maybe you can start thinking about how to decentralize more. And that's what Uniswap and Aave and all these companies are really doing right now. where like they figure out the product, they have the smart contracts, they have an application that works, they have like something that is like also kind of automatic, where they don't have to like monitor that every day, and they're just like thinking what's next. And one of those things is like to give some value from that from the users to the user, make it possible, and that's like where it makes sense. But from the start, I feel like I was saying at the start as well, I don't think you're just making your life things harder, as you said.
Yeah, sort of to also add in another layer of maybe like a devil's counterpart to that is thinking of permissioned DAOs. So I think, for example, you mentioned Uniswap, maybe ENS, a lot of these organizations who have done airdrops or for whom like anyone is able to buy their token on exchanges, that means that anyone is able to come and have an opinion and play with you. But you could also just permission that access of the decentralized organization to a point where it may be easier to manage, where you're still a DAO, but you may have some sort of like filter as to who comes in and is able to work with you. And I think that's certainly sort of a next step that we're going to be seeing in DAOs moving forward.
Element Finance did something interesting here where they airdropped they built their product, they had early users, and then they airdropped tokens to folks, but they made the tokens non-transferable. So there's no market for the tokens, right? It's just purely voting tokens. They gave it to a wide range. I mean, I think they pulled back even to like contributors to open source projects that they used to build on top of their protocol. But yeah, they purposefully made it such that it is not transferable and there's no market for it. And so it's only those that were early in the ecosystem that can do it. Now look, they could vote to change that later on, but that's how they wanted to start it off.
Yeah, I love this idea, almost like a layered DAO. So the more you kind of contribute, the more you can kind of go closer to the kind of the core team where the big decisions are made. But you have like this levels, almost like a onion with like different layers. And I mean, some people are fine just being a token holder and voting once a year. Most people rather do that than actually putting in the work. So having those kind of gates, I mean, I don't love the word gates, but kind of the things that help you filter who are the people that are willing and capable of adding value, and the ones that are happy to just watch on the sidelines, but still have the feeling of ownership of being somewhat part of that project. Maybe, I mean, we're closing to the end. I would invite you to think of one question to ask them, but I'll ask you one last one while you can think of questions to ask us, which is, which DAO do you think is a good benchmark for people trying to build DAOs, trying to understand the space a little bit more? Which one would you pick as a good like benchmark case study that people can look and try to learn from?
I really like the example of a DAO called Party DAO, which is making a product that just allows you to collaboratively bid on NFTs and then like fractionalize them. I like this example because they originally started with a crowdfund and they said like, okay, let's like build this thing in the open, let's allow everyone to contribute. And then like nothing, it was a mess because doing this from the start is a mess. So they regrouped and they decided, okay, we're going to do it a different way. We're going to like hire a team and we're going to have like a founder in a way. And it's still going to be a DAO in the terms that like people have to approve this action and people still get to have some input, but they get more of an input that shareholders in a traditional company would have, more than like the actual like vote on everything DAO. And then it worked and they made a great product. And now they're exploring more options to like maybe give up more control. But I really like the example because first of all, they managed to build something really cool, but also it illustrates this process of just like decentralizing from the start versus decentralizing progressively.
Thank you.
Nice, love that. I think one that I've been following closely is Forefront. I think number one, if they didn't coin the term social tokenized communities, maybe someone else did, but they've certainly gone full on the edge of studying it at a higher depth. And I love that their governance mechanism is what they call like a vibes infinity flow, which is essentially like we're all collective, but we're all individual, and thinking through what areas of the organization are centralized and what areas are decentralized. So, for example, they're very much strategic about making sure that the long-term vision, the long-term strategy of the organization is centralized, while sort of the initiatives that are able to come up, the working groups and the community environment is decentralized. And I think that it's very interesting how they've been playing along between the two.
I want to cop out and say, I think Ethereum is, I would consider it a DAO, and I think it's pretty insane how much has been built on top of it and to truly autonomous and decentralized way. Like there's no one in Ethereum that can just tell people to not build what they want to build, and you can just go spin up, start your own token, start your own project on top of it. I think that's in 7 years to get to where we are today is like pretty insane, and I think is actually like a beautiful poster child of what that can actually become when you enable people to build autonomously and in a decentralized manner.
Yeah, almost all of us forget about the mother of DAOs, which is Ethereum. So we're about to close. Does anyone have a question about DAOs? I see a hand.
Yeah. So my question is, so we all have like some idea of the strengths and the weaknesses of decentralization in DAOs. What is your main heuristic for deciding upon an activity or a proposal that unlocks the full power of a DAO, that mode of decision making, and how has that heuristic changed since you began in the space?
So kind of to understand, what do you mean by the attributes of a proposal? What are you thinking of?
So, like, for an activity or something you're going to vote on, how do you know whether this is a thing that maybe should be centralized, like if it doesn't really matter that much, if people aren't going to care, versus like something that is worth the cost of decentralization in terms of speed and efficiency? Like, how do you know, oh, this is something that DAO should definitely be voted on, as opposed to a minor.
The way I think about this often ends up being, to what extent do I think the community would react if we said, hey, we made this decision and we're doing, if like a core team said, hey, we're just doing this, to what extent would that impact the community? But also, how do I think they would feel? If I put myself in their shoes, would I be pissed off? Would I be like, no, that makes sense. Like, I don't have the context for that. And so I think it's a little bit of spectrum of like, how much context do you need to make what seemingly would be a better decision? But at the end of the day, I try to remember I'm a community member too, and this is my space and my group that I'm a part of, and I want to make it better. So would I be disappointed if I heard that they made this decision without consulting us?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point in terms of like respect to one another, but also when it comes to assets, I think it's important. So if we're sharing this pool of resources, is this going to take half of the treasury in order to work? Like, all right, people got to know and be structured about it. And that's, I don't want to get financial, but realistically, also the value of the token, right? So if you have X amount of your assets in this native token, then if the price goes up or down, that affects the community, and certainly worth considering the actions there and how much involvement do you want to get so that community is sustainable and stays with you longer term.
Anyone has a question? I mean, we're a bit over time, but yeah, Katie in the back.
I mean, I would say every DAO has a goal. Maybe it's not as clear as like buying the constitution and then we're done, but you definitely want to do something. Like the idea of a DAO is like a group of people getting together to achieve something. And that something can be building a product, it can be just like doing investments, it can be, I don't know, bringing more women to Web3, whatever it is, you still have a goal. And basically what you do is you just like track progress towards that goal and like come up with initiatives. So even if it's not as clear, like there's something that all of these people are coming together to achieve. And so you can just like figure out what that is, I guess.
Yeah, I'll also add in the metric of engagement. So it's not worth anything if you have 30,000 people in a Discord who are like silent. And so it's not only that you're growing over time, but realistically that people want to be involved and that they want to participate. They're coming up with initiatives. They have a process to make those initiatives happen. And those are certainly metrics to say that you're maturing and sort of moving in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, well, we're over time. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Juliette, Emo, and Miguel for your time and for sharing your insights. And yeah, we'll see you around. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.